The courtroom was a stark, fluorescent-lit chamber, its air heavy with routine proceedings. An elderly man, wrist-bound in handcuffs, shuffled to the defendant's table. His face, etched with the wear of years, bore the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much. "Name?" the clerk asked, voice clipped. "Elijah Ward, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired," he replied, his voice low but steady, carrying the faint tremor of age. No one could have anticipated the turn this hearing would take. Judge Clara Bennett, a woman known for her unyielding composure, scanned the file before her. Her eyes lingered on a detail, and for a moment, her professional mask faltered, her breath caught, her hands stilled. The name Elijah Ward wasn't just another entry on a docket. It was the name of the man who, decades ago, had carried her father to safety through a hail of bullets in Fallujah. Type honor if you believe valor endures, no matter how time or circumstance tries to dim it. Elijah, now 71, sat hunched in a threadbare coat, its faded green a relic from a thrift store bin. Once, he'd stood proud in a crisp Marine uniform, ribbons pinned to his chest. Now, he faced judgment in clothes that barely fit, under lights that deepened the lines of hardship across his face. Vietnam had scarred him first, then Iraq, wounds both seen and unseen carried in silence through the years. Docket 19C, City vs. Elijah Ward, the bailiff announced. Charges: loitering, public disturbance, failure to comply with a lawful order. Elijah rose slowly, his joints protesting from old shrapnel wounds, and the ache of winter's spin exposed. The prosecutor, a young woman in a sharp blazer, began. "Mr. Ward has been repeatedly cited for lingering near the Market Street diner. The owner reports multiple complaints over the past month. What she omitted was that Elijah had only sought the faint warmth of the diner's exhaust vent on nights when the cold bit deepest. He never begged, never disturbed patrons, just sat quietly, grateful for the occasional scraps slipped to him by a kind-hearted line cook." Officer Daniel Hayes testified next. "At 12:15 a.m., I found the defendant behind the diner. He was instructed to leave but did not comply immediately. In truth, Elijah had only asked for a moment to finish a piece of bread the cook had given him, a small act of kindness he hadn't wanted to waste. Your Honor," the prosecutor pressed, "this is Mr. Ward's fourth citation in 6 months. We recommend a $200 fine and a 60-day exclusion from the downtown area." Such an order would cut Elijah off from the only shelter he knew, a mission on Pine Street, and the weekly meals at St. Mary's Church. It would leave him truly adrift in the heart of winter. "Mr. Ward," Judge Bennett said, her voice measured but curious, "do you have counsel today?" Elijah shook his head. His assigned public defender was absent, pulled into another case. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" she asked, her gaze softening slightly. He cleared his throat, the sound rough from disuse. "No excuses, Your Honor. Just needed a place to keep warm. The diner's vent, it's bearable there. The cook, Marcus, he's a good kid. His uncle and I served together in '91. Judge Bennett's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Your service record," she said, glancing at the file, "indicates you were in the Marines from 1973 to 1993, with a second tour in Iraq in 2004. Correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied, his posture straightening instinctively. "Gunnery Sergeant, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines." The judge made a note, her expression tightening as she read further. Before she could continue, the courtroom doors swung open. A man in a tailored suit strode in, exuding quiet confidence. He set a sleek briefcase on the table and addressed the court. "Your Honor, Michael Langston, representing Mr. Ward. I apologize for the late arrival, but I've been retained to handle this case." Elijah blinked, bewildered. He hadn't hired anyone, couldn't afford to? "This is irregular, Mr. Langston," Judge Bennett said, her tone sharp but intrigued. The court wasn't notified of new counsel. "A recent development, Your Honor," Langston replied smoothly. "I request a brief recess to consult with my client." Judge Bennett studied him, then Elijah, before nodding. 15 minutes, she declared, retreating to her chambers with a swiftness that suggested urgency. Elijah turned to the stranger. "I can't pay for a lawyer." "You don't have to," Langston said quietly. "My firm, Bennett and Langston, is taking your case pro bono." Elijah's brow furrowed. "Bennett?" "Like the judge." "Her brother-in-law," Langston confirmed with a faint smile. In her chambers, Judge Clara Bennett sat alone, her hands unsteady as she pulled a faded photograph from her desk. It showed her father, Captain David Bennett, in his Marine uniform, grinning beside her at her high school graduation. Next to it lay his final letter from Iraq, its edges worn from years of handling. In it, he'd written of a firefight near Fallujah, where his platoon was ambushed. Gunnery Sergeant Ward saved my life, he'd written. Ran through gunfire to drag me to cover, then held off the enemy so the medics could get to us. 2 months later, her father was killed in a helicopter crash. At his funeral, a Marine had approached her mother, his voice thick with emotion. Your husband saved me, too, because of Ward. I was the corpseman he pulled to safety. That Marine had been Elijah Ward. Clara had searched for him afterward, hoping to learn more about her father's final days. But the Marine Corps had lost track of him after his discharge. PTSD and a spinal injury from his last tour had left him unable to work, and he'd slipped through the cracks of a broken system. Now, fate had brought him to her courtroom, homeless, unrecognized, charged with the crime of trying to survive. A knock broke her reverie. Michael Langston entered, his expression grave. Clara, is it really him? The Marine from David's letters? She nodded, showing him the letter. Fallujah, April 2004. Same unit, same action. He was awarded a Bronze Star, but I suspect there's more to the story. What happened to him? Langston asked. PTSD, injuries, bureaucracy, Clara said, her voice tight. His wife left during his last deployment. He lost his home, his job. The VA failed him. Langston shook his head. And now he's here, in your courtroom. I can't let him disappear again, Clara said, her resolve hardening. Not this time. When court reconvened, Judge Bennett's demeanor was impeccable, though her hands betrayed a slight tremble. Mr. Langston, how does your client plead? Your Honor, Langston began, we request dismissal of all charges. Mr. Ward was merely seeking shelter from sub-zero temperatures, a necessity, not a crime. Additionally, we can prove he had tacit permission from a diner employee to be on the premises. The prosecutor started to object, but Judge Bennett raised a hand. Mr. Ward, she said, turning to Elijah, your record mentions an engagement in Fallujah, April 8, 2004. Were you involved in rescuing a wounded officer, Captain David Bennett, under enemy fire? Elijah's eyes clouded with memory. Yes, ma'am. Captain Bennett was hit during an ambush. I pulled him behind a burned-out vehicle. He kept yelling to get the others first, but I couldn't leave him. A hush fell over the courtroom. In the gallery, an older woman in a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap leaned forward, her eyes wide with recognition. And Captain Bennett? Judge Bennett asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. We got him to the medevac, Elijah said softly. Heard he made it to the hospital. But later, I learned he didn't make it home. The woman in the VFW cap stood abruptly. That's Gunny Ward, she called out. I was there. He saved half our squad that day. Order, Judge Bennett said, her gavel striking once, though her tone lacked its usual edge. She turned back to Elijah. Mr. Ward, this court needs to address matters beyond these charges. We'll take a brief recess. In her chambers, Clara dialed a number she hadn't called in years. Colonel Ramirez, it's Clara Bennett. I need your help, urgently. When court resumed, 3 Marines in dress blues entered behind the judge, a colonel, a first sergeant, and a lance corporal carrying a velvet-lined case. The room buzzed with whispers. Elijah stood instinctively, his old Marine bearing resurfacing. Judge Bennett set aside her glasses, addressing the court with rare vulnerability. I must disclose a personal connection. Captain David Bennett, mentioned by the defendant, was my father. In his last letter, he wrote of a gunnery sergeant who risked everything to save him in Fallujah, giving my family precious time with him we wouldn't have had. She looked at Elijah, her eyes glistening. That man was you, Gunnery Sergeant Ward. The VFW woman in the gallery nodded vigorously. He carried the captain and 2 others to safety. Took shrapnel himself doing it. Judge Bennett gestured to the colonel. Colonel Ramirez has information to share. The colonel stepped forward. Gunnery Sergeant Ward, the Marine Corps has been searching for you. A review of your service record under the Veterans Legacy Program revealed additional details about April 8, 2004. Your actions saved not only Captain Bennett but disrupted an enemy operation, saving dozens of lives. The Lance Corporal opened the case, revealing a medal on a crimson ribbon. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, Ramirez continued, the Bronze Star awarded to Gunnery Sergeant Elijah Ward is upgraded to the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elijah shook his head, his voice hoarse. There's a mistake. I just did my duty. No mistake, Ramirez said firmly. This is long overdue. From the gallery, the VFW woman shouted, attention on deck. Veterans and civilians alike rose, saluting or standing in respect. Even the prosecutor stood, her earlier sharpness replaced by humility. Judge Bennett's voice wavered as she spoke. In light of this, all charges against Gunnery Sergeant Ward are dismissed with prejudice. Her gavel fell with finality. This court is adjourned. As the room emptied, the first sergeant approached Elijah with a tablet. Sir, your VA benefits have been reinstated. 100% disability, retroactive to your discharge. That includes back pay, medical care, and housing support. Langston added, our firm will ensure it's processed immediately. No more red tape. Marcus, the diner's cook, approached, his eyes wet. My uncle always talked about you, Gunny. Said you saved his platoon. I didn't know it was you I was leaving food for. The prosecutor, now subdued, offered her hand. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know your story. Judge Bennett descended from the bench, her judicial reserve gone. My father wrote something about you, she said softly. He said you told him, Marines don't leave Marines. Today, we honor that promise to you. 3 weeks later, Elijah stood in a modest apartment, part of a VA housing program for homeless veterans. On the wall hung his Navy Cross, flanked by his Purple Heart and other medals, recovered by Langston's firm from a long-forgotten storage unit. A knock sounded, and Judge Clara Bennett stood at the door, holding a small envelope. May I come in, Gunnery Sergeant? She asked. Just Elijah, please, he said, ushering her inside. Then I'm Clara, she replied, sitting across from him. I brought something. She handed him a letter, its paper fragile with age. My father wrote this after you saved him. Elijah read aloud, his voice catching. Gunny Ward is the kind of Marine you read about in books. He ran through hell to get me out, then went back for the others. If I can lead half as well as he does, I'll have done my job. He was a good man, Elijah said. Tried to give me his canteen when we got to cover. Clara smiled faintly. After we lost him, I started a veterans advocacy program. It was because of you, because of what he wrote about the system failing its own. Elijah looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. I'm no hero. Just did what I was trained to do. That's what makes you one, Clara said. My father's last mission, he volunteered because he wanted to live up to you. Elijah's breath hitched. For years, he'd wondered if his actions in Fallujah had mattered, if saving the captain had only delayed the inevitable. He didn't die because of you, Clara said, sensing his thoughts. He lived with purpose because of you. They sat in silence, bound by a shared loss and a debt finally acknowledged. Outside, the city was quiet, dusted with fresh snow. You remembered my name, Elijah said at last, his voice barely audible. After all this time. Someone always remembers, Clara replied. And now, the world will, too. In that moment, a piece of Elijah Ward's long-buried honor was restored, not just for him, but for all who had ever stood in the shadow of sacrifice.